So let's get started on our next talk. I'm going to introduce Loren Mahler, and the name of the talk is How Should You Prepare for the Implementation of Connecticut's New Cyber Strategy? So give her a warm welcome.
All right, thank you, great. I heard that, so I know someone's awake, which is awesome. 2:30 in the afternoon is always my favorite time slot to draw because it's a little bit of a coin flip on how many heads are still here and how many heads are actually looking up. So I'm going to be watching, just so you know. I have nothing to throw, but I will find something if I need to. Two quick things before we jump all into this. First off, I am not a technical person. You're welcome. You're going to get something a little bit different here for the next hour because there is nothing I'm about to tell you that is going to make you snazzier at what you do. It's going to make you more aware of what is going on through other parts of your company and what kinds of priorities and things people like me are out there telling your bosses to do. And the kinds of advice that they're getting that will eventually, at some point, likely impact all of your lives. So this really is sort of let's think of it as a broader educational opportunity into what's going on from the business side of the world. Quick background on me. I am an independent consultant. I own my own strategic communications company focusing on cybersecurity and defense issues. My background is primarily in national security, communications, policy, politics. Spent over a decade in Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill, Department of Defense, National Security Council, always doing communications, policy, politics, rolled up into a big swirly mess of, I don't know, make it up yourself and figure out what to do for us. So that's what I like, and that's what this job lets me do now that I get to be my own boss. So spent a few years doing corporate communications in New York before launching out on my own. So have always enjoyed being in roles and finding places to understand different parts of an organization, different parts of a company, different parts of a government agency, and what all of their priorities and needs and assets are, and how we bring all those things together to move forward towards whatever those organizational objectives are, whether they're policy objectives, whether they're business, whatever they may be. So firmly now in the cybersecurity space, spend a lot of time with clients, particularly around IR planning, because obviously that's one of the key places where crisis communications and things like that can play a role. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But Connecticut's got this great new strategy that's out there, and strategies are awesome because they tell you what the strategy is and then they stop talking. So now the next step is to figure out how we actually take those great, cool ideas and actually turn them into something that requires action. And there are so many ways that could go right now. We're still in the figuring it out. I keep saying we, and I really just mean whoever the smart people in Connecticut are that are doing this, because I'm not one of them, figuring out what they're going to do. And there are a lot of examples that we can look to in other states and other industries and other sectors that have tried to do strategies followed up by action plans to see. Most recently, the Department of Financial Services in New York. I'm sure that is lightly, to say the least, touching on many of your lives. But that is something that I've been digging into and speaking about a bit as well. And there are a lot of similarities between what they did and good lessons to be learned that can play out in this situation. And I think we can, what I'd like to do today is dig a little bit into some of the highlighted sections that I see of the strategy that give us some insight into what the authors were thinking, and combine those with some very broad, high-level trends across the, quote, cyber industry right now, and look at some of the things that we've seen work with DFS as well, and kind of combine all those into, okay, great, what does that tell us about what may be coming down the road for us, and how can we take what we think may be coming and use that intel to actually take concrete steps right now as an organization or as a business so that when somebody actually requires us to do something, it's not this huge giant burden. It's something that we've already started moving towards or we've already done, and now all we have to do is maybe check a box on a new form and we're done. So that's what we're going to start out with today. We're going to look at a lot of different buckets of things. And if I'm lucky, this keeps working every time I push the button. So like I said, not a tech person. So this is directly from the strategy itself, and there's not a lot in here that says, here's what we're going to do next for an action plan, but the word action comes up like 36 times. So one of the things the strategy outlines are 7 foundational principles, and we're going to talk about those and insights we can draw from them and what they mean. Great, here, all of those principles, they line up, they make this great little pathway, and we're all going to hold hands and march down it towards this great new place, and anybody can do this, and it's going to make us all awesome. And then seriously, this is probably what's going to happen. This is why I have a job. Because more companies than you like to think are this guy. And normally this guy is pretty cool. Not so much these days, unless he's hiring me and then he's still cool. So we're going to talk through the strategy. We're going to look at some trends. We're going to talk action plan. You can tell I came out of a very list-oriented life, so we're going to do a lot of bullets. I'm not writing it down if I'm going to say it, because you can read what I can say. So bottom line, big takeaway, money slide right here. I apply this to whatever's coming down the road from Connecticut, as well as what we've seen with the DFS regs in New York. You can view this as just another compliance issue, as just something else you have to do, another box you have to check, something else to spend money and time just clearing the hurdle. Or you can view it as a chance to actually establish a comprehensive risk-based cybersecurity program that effectively brings your company up to the level that it should be today. And if you do that, that in itself creates opportunities for your company, for your organization. That is where you can actually use that to propel yourselves even further. So there is business opportunity within this if you choose to view it and approach it through that lens. Bottom line, right there, take it, run away. If you have to leave, this is when you can go. So the strategy, what it actually says. It covers 5 sectors, and each sector gets lots of detailed attention, lots of love, lots of stuff going on, what they have done, things like that. It looks at the 5 sectors that it has chosen. It states that it's done so because within the state of Connecticut, these are the main targets. If you took everything in Connecticut and broke it down into 5 groups, you could probably put all of them in these 5 groups. So it's more of a classification system than it is a winnowing down. But if something were to occur, and the strategy document itself approaches a lot of these sectors and a lot of the principles it addresses from the perspective of if something really big happens in our state, as opposed to if a company gets breached here. It's more, what happens if the grid goes down? What happens if, something happens and shit blows up? It's kind of big things like that. So there's a lot of a recurring theme related to disaster response, because that is something that the state has planned for. That is something that the country as a whole has done so much better planning for over the last 15 years or so. So there are a lot of parallels that it draws to those frameworks that are developed. But these are considered to be the biggest targets and the people most likely to have responsibility for responding to something in some way, shape, or form. These folks are going to have to take action. So you have the Connecticut state government. Obviously, we're big government. We hold all your stuff. We have all your information. Of course, people want to come to us because we have all the cool things. The municipalities, I have to say, I have lived in the state of Connecticut for 5 years, and you guys are a hot little mess of sorely little municipalities scattered around this state. There are towns, there are groups of things, there are government entities, organizations. I just want some cities and counties. If we could just clear that up, that'd be super helpful. So municipalities get their own attention here because it's such a structure here in the state. It's very unique. Businesses, specifically focusing on critical infrastructure, financial services, insurance, and defense, obviously very large industries here in the state with very valuable data. Higher education, another very significant industry in the state. Higher education is such a unique, as an aside, such a unique sector to really look at, because when you think of financial services, you think, oh yeah, they want to steal my credit card information. They want to steal my bank account number. That's awesome. Well, they've got that in higher education too. They've got your social security number. They've got your financial information. They've got all the health records of their students. They've got all the employee data related to their staff. They've got all the data related to the research projects they're doing and the subjects who are in the research projects, the data sets that have been brought into that, the levels and just sheer quantity of data held within a single Institute of Higher Education is just phenomenal, and people rarely look at it to that extent. So that's a whole little bucket in itself. Law enforcement and security, obviously, always a big part of this. So those are the 5 big sectors that it breaks down into, but it also explicitly states that the types of lessons drawn and the types of focus for each of these industries can be applied across the board. And ironically, it's not one of the sectors listed here, but the strategy makes a really, really big emphasis on regular citizens, normal, everyday people. If there's one thing that I think they would want you to grab and run with from this strategy, it's that this is the thing for everybody. Everybody has a role, everyone has a part to play, everyone has a responsibility, everyone's a target, blah, 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 all those things. But that if we all come together and we all get smarter in our own small ways about what we're doing and how we're securing our small piece of this whole puzzle, then overall, the state becomes more secure. And not only that, it actually becomes a business driver here in the state. And if there's anything Connecticut would really love to do, it's drive economic development, drive business, drive new residents, drive new jobs for those new residents. Chicken and the egg, don't care which comes first, just keep coming here. By creating Connecticut as a entity that is known for being cyber secure and for having that ecosystem built up, that is something in the long term that drives all of this, and that'll come up a little bit here later on. So the 7 principles that it talks about, each of these come up in various ways, shapes, and forms in different sections, both deep dives in and of themselves and also related to the different industries. But leadership obviously has to play a large part in all of this. It really emphasizes, before we jump into these, another little aside, nothing in here is rocket science. Nothing at this level, nothing that talks about trends, nothing that talks about industries and specifics related to them is rocket science. But putting it all together in one way, shape, form, so everyone's moving in the same direction and basing it on the same information is something that actually makes a difference. So obviously, executives drive culture. Everyone knows the more the culture of your organization is driven in a cyber secure direction, that direction comes from the top. Nobody down sitting at a little desk over in the corner, punching buttons all day is going to make anybody else feel all culturally cyber secure. You may be able to have a really great secure corner, but that's it. The bigger change has to be emphasized from the top. It also drives resources. That's where the decisions are made about priorities for resources. That is another theme that will run throughout this, is that resources drive so much, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. Literacy, there needs to be a baseline level of knowledge across both entities as well as individuals, employees, students, K-12, college students, staff, regular everyday Joes walking down the street. Everyone needs to know something. Preparation, risk-based plans are key, and basing those plans on the existing disaster frameworks that the state operates on. And I'm not even going to start listing off the acronym gobbledygook that is in here about all the different types of frameworks and organizations that exist to share information and have frameworks that you can base off of. But the state has really done a big focus on disaster response, and a lot of those lessons translate easily into the cyberspace. So we can expect to see a lot of similarities there, I think, coming down the line. Response is another key area. It's not enough to just have a plan. You have to actually execute your plan well based on what you see on the ground. And information sharing is a huge, huge, huge thing across the board. And we'll talk about that again in a minute. Recovery, obviously, mitigate the threat, restore your operations, get everything back up and running, keep it running. Business continuity, kind of critical here. And evaluation. Evaluate what happened, how it went, and what you can do better next time. That's a piece that applies in any type of disaster response. I used to work for many, many years on Capitol Hill right after 9/11. I got there, and the office I was with had a lot of folks in it who were there on 9/11, and every time we would have a fire drill from our 3rd floor corner office in our convoluted building, we would go outside, someone would hold the door, we'd go down the stairs, someone would hold the door, we'd leave, and then we would spend 2 hours evaluating how effectively we held the door, how effectively we went down the stairs. Maybe we should go down different stairs. Those were too crowded. Maybe someone else should hold the door. Evaluation is good. It's not everything. you can evaluate only so much. There's only so many ways to hold a door. So communication, major piece here on information sharing. A lot of people have done a lot of things across a lot of different industries. There's a lot of best practices out there. There's no sense in recreating the wheel if you guys are just down the street from each other. You know, Connecticut's big, it's not that big. Somewhere, somebody should be able to trade information. Breaking down silos, sharing information, public-private, big thing. Government, private sector, increasing those lines of communications makes a big deal too, because not everybody has the, sole ownership over good stuff. Verification, measuring and reporting progress on each of these principles as a way to sort of focus improvement going forward. I think we'll see a lot of that. And then, so the strategy is 20-something, 30-something pages long. I should know that exact answer by now, and I don't. I blocked it in my brain. But it has a lot of stuff in there. These 5 themes it specifically calls out in the beginning, saying these permeate through everything. And we've just talked about some of them. They do. Education and training, everyone everywhere at any level, in any position, any desk, always at the ready. Everyone's always ready to go. So you've done your training, you've done your simulations, you've got the education, great, that's all there. We're closing the skills gap between what people know and the skills that exist in the state now versus what we need going forward. And I know skills gap is a phrase that we apply across the board. Put it in manufacturing, we have a huge skills gap. Put it anywhere, but in cyber particularly. Information sharing, we just talked about threats and best practices, break down silos. Budget priority. Anytime you use the word budget in Connecticut right now, everyone kind of like shivers a little bit. It's like a twitch. But the idea is that cybersecurity needs to be raised to the level of any other general public safety consideration. Any other budget line item that has to do with police, fire, anything like that, cybersecurity in some way, shape, or form needs to be at that level. It's an annual consideration. It's annually funded because it's such a consistent part of our lives and it permeates everything. Consistent, adequate funding. Everybody has a role to play. We've talked about this too. Nobody's immune. We have a culture of security across our state, not just within an organization. Same thing. People at all up and down levels are focused on this, or at least aware of what's going on, and making it a hallmark of the state, making it a business driver here, like we talked about, increasing companies, jobs, residents, all those good things that we want more and more of. This is a great way to do that because it's such a growing field with such an extremely high potential. So what's next? One of the specific things, this is actually directly from the strategy. Remember, we're talking about pulling together all these clues to figure out what we can do and what specific steps we can take. Engage with the sectors, put together a plan, action plans, clarify the steps. Here are the things that we should focus on with our action plan, whatever they may be as they come up, whether they're industry specific, whether they're across the board, whatever. Whether they come through regulation, whether they come through tax credits, however it happens, carrots or sticks, here's what we're focused on. Critical infrastructure, information sharing, closing the talent gap, law enforcement. My favorite is activate our citizenry to be lifelong learners. That's probably really super specific, and I'm sure we'll have an entire way to regulate that coming up shortly. It's probably going to be the most low-hanging fruit out there. So another clue, take it for what you will. I like to think of the strategy within the context of the trends that we see across the broader cyber industry. And I say cyber, I say security, someone else may say infosec, someone else may say risk, whatever. Same thing, you know what we're talking about. But the big trends that we see that make a modern cybersecurity program, modern cybersecurity practices within a company, security to resilience, we're going to dig into each of these here, but like I said, I like lists. Security to resilience, planning and response, whole of enterprise, less firewall, more ecosystem. So security to resilience, this is kind of the big one here, that it's not just, and again, this is going to be a whole big section in here that is going to be preaching to the choir, and if it's not, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong choir, pay attention. So security to resilience, it's not just how do you defend yourself anymore, it's, you know, I'm going to say it's not if, it's when. If I hear one more person say that to me as if it was brand new, then I'm walking out of whatever room I'm in, so I have to couch that with I know you've heard that a lot. But it's relevant here for this. It's not just defense. It's not just keeping someone out. It's assuming they're going to get in. You want to reduce the likelihood that they come in, but you also want to really, really improve your process for what the hell you're going to do when it happens. Making sure that business continuity is a huge focus. Not just getting your systems back up and running, but actually making sure your company continues to function. Evaluation and improvement are a natural built-in piece of any resilience effort, making sure that you're learning constantly from what you're doing. And I think a theme of constantly doing something has been running throughout this day, from your threat evaluations to whatever they were talking about before and those kinds of things. But the idea that this is always evolving, there's nothing static about cybersecurity. If you become static, then you become stale. Training and exercises can't just be focused on you and your system. They have to be realistic. If you're really going to test a full plan across an organization, small, medium, or large, there are ways to design scenarios that give you a realistic sense of what you can expect. And I really emphasize this coming from a communications place, because that is a big piece of what I see a lot, is companies spending all this time and all these resources and all these man hours on training to their plan, exercising, except they're training to something that's never in the world going to happen. Why are you spending so much time trying to figure out whether or not your CEO can withstand some really tough reporter questions? If your CEO is in front of a reporter, you already lose. You've already done something very wrong. So training and exercises must be realistic to really test the resilience of your organization, not just your defense abilities. So acknowledge they can get in. You should be able to mitigate the damage without bringing down your company. For good resilience, it's both planning and response. It's not just, is my plan really good? You need a really good plan, but then if you take that really good plan, you stick it on the shelf and you pull it down and you start trying to follow all those steps in the fog of war after something's happened, again, you already lose. So the ultimate price of a breach, and again, I have an entire bullet up here that I threw in for Equifax, because this has been something that I have been standing on my little soapbox screaming about for ages, and then they just walked right into it and gave a good old textbook example. You can respond and make it so much worse. You get breached, it sucks. Something went wrong, it's going to cost you money, you're going to have to fix it, all of that. But if you handle it so poorly in your response, your bad problem becomes a ginormous problem. Nobody in a standard data breach gets hauled before the Senate Finance Committee. You get hauled before the Senate Finance Committee because there were so many headlines about how you sucked that now the senators want to ask you questions and throw bombs at you. So that, to me, comes in that sort of non-traditional planning stage. That's where a good communications response plays in. So reputation resilience is a thing that I hammer on all the time. Resilient networks are great, but if nobody trusts you enough to use them after you clean it up, who cares? You don't have a business anymore. Somewhere, somebody pays you to do something, and that's your business. Whatever those things are, fill in the nouns how you will. If those people stop paying you, you don't have a business anymore. So you have to maintain that trust. You have to maintain that loyalty, and a good response based on a good plan lets you do that. Non-traditional security functions, yep, got all of that. So it's not just putting together a plan, sticking it on the shelf. It's pulling it off the shelf and having the wherewithal to actually implement it the right way. The right way and the right plan is more than just the IT team. It's more than just tech folks, security folks sitting in a corner going, here's how we're going to make it all better. You have to have the whole team. And all crises are not created equal. All data breaches are not the same. You guys know this, but that also means that the response is not always the same. The building doesn't burn down every single time. Sometimes it's just a little spark and, maybe your desk catches on fire. Fine. That's a different kind of response. But a good plan, fully built out and comprehensive to all the different possibilities of what may happen and what may be required in the event of an incident, have to bring in multiple members of your team. I loved that part of, I'm sorry, I'm not scanning the room fast enough if DevOps guy is still in here, but go make new friends. Step one, go make new friends. Go meet people in IT, legal, human resources. Go meet your communications team. Go meet procurement. All of those folks are going to have somebody that they interact with regularly outside of your company who cares that this thing happened to you, or who may care. And whether or not they do, you need to already have those relationships in place so that you can get that information to the right people at the right times. So your whole team has to be a part of the solution here. And this is how good I am at drawing. This is where we talk about it's not just you. It's not just what's in your network, what's in your system, what data do you own, what users do you have, what controls are there, what kind of monitoring, all of that. You are now responsible in more ways for that full ecosystem. That full ecosystem not only can impact you and what you're responsible for every day in your little corner of the world, but it can actually impact your overall organization's ability to function. Look at Target. Who knows how they got hacked? Anybody? I see a lot of heads nodding. Someone start throwing out some words here. Yeah, the HVAC vendor. You know who doesn't actually control your point of sale machines? The HVAC vendor. You know who was a great, fabulous, weakest link? The HVAC vendor. So let's just take that and put it here. You need to be responsible at some level for the security across that entire ecosystem. And from the perspective of a company and a business that's used to being all internally secure, that sucks, because that is a huge shift in mindset. That's a huge new approach and so much more work. It's also an extremely required piece of the DFS regs that came out. So if you're subject to those, or you're working with someone who's subject to those, this is the piece they hate the most. It's also the piece that they have 2 years to implement because it's such a cumbersome process. It's also incredibly important because that's why people are focusing on it now. So, action plan. These are the trends that we've talked about. We've pulled some pieces here and there from the strategy, but now specifically, without knowing what exactly you're going to be required to do by the state of Connecticut in some way, shape, or form, whether it's going to be actual regulations that are very specific or whether it's going to be less prescriptive. One of the highlights, I think, of the DFS regs is that they're not prescriptive. You're required to meet functional steps along the way. There are functional requirements, but it is left open to the company to decide how best to meet those functional requirements given their specific situation and their resources. So as long as you have shown that you have made a good faith effort to do these things, nobody cares how you do it. So the action plan, the pieces that I have pulled for this that to me are the most obvious are the lowest hanging fruit of what you should be doing anyway. You probably are doing these already. If you're not, don't tell me. But if you're not, these are the most basic, immediate actions that you can initiate tomorrow. You can't finish them tomorrow, but you can start them tomorrow, start the process that move you significantly closer towards a full modern cyber program practice, whatever you want to call it. So 5 steps, because I like 5, more bullets, this is important. Risk assessment, we're going to do more with the ecosystem. We're going to talk about IR planning. Tailored solutions, I think, is key. We're going to talk about off the shelf and why that's super irrelevant. And I think the opportunity. There's a huge opportunity for business positioning and industry advancement here, I think, vis-a-vis competitors. So I think overlooking that would be, an unfortunate lost opportunity. So step 1, everything should start with a risk assessment. Too many companies just want to run out and buy tech this, tech that, throw it in, we're secure. Not necessarily. That's not how it works. Probably not, actually. You need to really understand the status quo of what you're dealing with your company first. The idea of a risk assessment, like I said, not rocket science, but really important to emphasize the value of starting right there. You need to know what is unique to your company. What do you have? What's valuable? What's not valuable? What's, rank it? What's more or less valuable? You need to know where the weaknesses are, your people, your systems, your vendors, whatever that may be. And you need to know what the threats are directed towards the type of valuable information you have. There's also a big piece of this, again, putting back on my little communications hat, where there's a whole element to a risk assessment, if you're really doing it right, that evaluates your standing in industry, because that will have a big say in how people react to you. If the goal of being a resilient company is to make sure that you still have a company when this is all said and done, and that maybe you can still function while it's going on, then you need to know and have insight into how people are going to react to what happens to you. So knowing what your current industry positioning is, knowing what your current industry footprint is, particularly vis-a-vis your competitors, who may or may not have an opportunity for themselves to take advantage of the situation, knowing that that's there is a big deal. Knowing whether or not, oh yeah, that's right, we just screwed something else up 6 months ago, so they're probably going to take this news a little worse than they would have otherwise. Knowing that context is really important. So fully and comprehensively reviewing the risks associated with your company helps you determine where to allocate your resources to shore up the weakest links, to plug the biggest holes, and you're not wasting time on things you don't need, particularly money. And everything comes back to resources, particularly when you're talking to a C-suite audience. So appropriately allocating limited resources starts with a good risk assessment, so you know where they need it, where you have a need for them. Ecosystem due diligence. This is almost directly from DFS, because I think it laid it out really well from the DFS regs. You need to know what's in that third-party ecosystem. Not just that they're there and you should probably ask them some questions, but you should really seriously know what the hell's going on in their networks, because they are plugging into yours. You want to identify, and this is, again, this is big. I'm not saying this like this is something you can go out, start it on Monday, you're done with it on Friday, yay, good job. No. This is much longer than that. There's a reason this is the final implementation step for DFS, because it takes the longest to do it right, particularly if you have thousands of vendors. Not everyone will, phew, but identifying and assessing the risk that comes from those third parties, knowing what they access, what they do, and really having a handle on that matters. Due diligence. Like, you really have to put in the work to evaluate their systems. You have to ask them questions. You have to go out and poke things and see if they work. You have to go on site and see if it really is the way they're telling you it is. Establishing minimum standards within the contracts makes a huge difference. Having actual contractual obligations for these vendors to do business with your company that says they will maintain the standards of security that you have set for them. And then periodically assessing that they're actually doing it. They didn't just do it to get in the door. Once they're in the door, they have to keep doing it. That's not the point. It's like getting into college. You got in, now you have to keep doing stuff. So the ecosystem piece can be small, medium, large. It can be as intensive as you or your organization decides is necessary, but some version of due diligence has to happen. IR planning. This is my favorite place where I pretty much play all the time, so I promise not to talk for like 30 minutes about this. But basically, a good IR plan has very basic steps to it. Even a basic IR plan that's not that great has a bunch of really basic boxes you have to check and a bunch of basic steps to take. And in my mind, 75% of the work that goes into taking those steps can be done ahead of time. You don't have to wait until something blows up before you actually start figuring out, like, I wonder, where our weak points are. Well, it's probably the thing that just blew up. So building your team, accounting for all the different priorities across that team. There's going to be a different set of priorities, and this is, again, one of my personal favorite places is understanding that your communications and marketing team has a different set of priorities than you do. A different set of priorities from the security folks, from the technology team, from, the sales team. But you all need to be part of the same conversation so that at a minimum you understand that everyone else is bringing something different to the table. And all of that doesn't just turn into giant fighting and whoever's the loudest wins the plan at the end of the day, because that is not a recipe for a good response. Assigning your roles and responsibilities, so that's anything you can do to minimize the amount of things you have to do in the chaos of a breach matters. Every little thing you can clear off before something goes wrong helps you. Assigning your roles and responsibilities, something that basic. Who's responsible for talking to which stakeholders? Who's responsible for talking to the board? Who's responsible for talking to the sales team or the, client management folks. Like, who's manning the phones and who's going to get that guy information? Establishing procedures, how you're going to do things, how information is going to flow, the background research that goes into just knowing who your stakeholders are, how do you talk to them, what do they care about, so that when you talk to them later, you don't anger them in the way that you've spoken to them. That was a big problem with Equifax. They put out their first statement, and the very first thing they said was, we're really disappointed this happened. You know what? So the hell is everybody else? Like, no one cares that you're disappointed. You just lost all my stuff. So knowing who your audiences are and why they are going to care that something happened to you and how you should talk to them. Do you need to build new channels? Do you need to build new tools? And then training with realistic exercises. We talked about that. Any IR plan you put together, you got to train it, and you got to train it the right way. Practice makes perfect when practiced perfectly. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Anyone come from a sports family? Anyway, that's relevant here. If I have to explain to you why that's relevant here, then it's not worth the time. But IR planning, super important, super easy to start and initiate, and definitely going to be a part of any requirement that comes down the road because it just is so significant these days in determining the actual impact of an incident. Solutions. So tailored solutions. A lot of times you'll find a company or an organization that hasn't put a lot of thought into cyber yet, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I have to do something. And they either run out and they buy that box on the shelf and they bring it home and they hand it to you and they make you open it and do something with it. Or the first 3 vendors in the door get contracts because, oh my God, we just need something tomorrow. None of that actually is relevant for your company. It's not a smart way to approach anything. You guys know this. A lot of times the people cutting the checks hopefully know that already, but it gets trumped in their head by the sheer panic to just do something quick, quick, quick. So take the time now before you're required to meet an implementation deadline to actually match solutions to need. And this goes back to your risk assessment. You know what your risks are, you know what your vulnerabilities are, you know what holes you need to plug, you know what your system requires. Go out and find things that actually manage your specific risk with your specific resources. Don't waste your time on unnecessary, shiny, flashy things that use all the right buzzwords. Just because I walk in the door and I say, oh, well, my machine learning, super cool, monitory, control-y thing, don't buy that unless that's what you need. If that's what you need, cool, buy it. Good luck with it, but still, you've done something. That's better than nothing. So a lot of these functions that must be met with tailored solutions, again, stole a lot of this from DFS, because a lot of these are the very basic requirements that covered entities, the companies who must meet those regulations, have to fill. And they're left open to decide how to fill. Resources, risk, etc. Again, show your work on everything, because that's what the regulators go back to see that you've really done this the right way. So I'm not even going to read through this list because this is all the stuff that you guys probably do and know and live in your sleep, or at least pieces of it. So somehow all of these functions have to be met. Cool. Do it in a way that meets you. And then opportunity. This is a little bit more jumping into what we said before. If you view this as an opportunity to really implement and develop a risk-based cyber program, then it's not a burden. It's not a compliance burden. It may be a burden because it will take time, it will take resources, it will take hours that you'd rather be spending, I don't know, doing something else. But your company can take advantage of that moment in multiple different ways that they couldn't when they weren't doing it. So one of the arguments that, or complaints I should say, that I hear from folks a lot is that, well, this would all be super fun, but nobody will approve my budgets. Nobody will give me the resources I need to really do this right. Okay, well, you're getting ready to have regulators breathing down your neck, so someone's going to decide you need to do this right. This gives you an extra, maybe a bigger stick to swing around and try and get some more money for your budgets. Yay, good for you. Providing a better customer experience, this really gets into a lot of the voodoo of the marketing world. There are certain companies who shall remain nameless that are always at the top of customer trust surveys. You ask customers, who do you trust? Who in the financial services industry specifically do you trust? And there is a specific credit card company that ends up in the top 1, 2, maybe 3 over and over and over and over and over, despite the fact that they have been breached over and over and over and over and over. You know why? They market on security. That is a big push for them as they reach out to their customers, so they have become known as a secure company that really cares about their customers and their security. If you actually care about your customers and security, because you're doing all of these other things and you're actually implementing a comprehensive program, it's always easier to sell something that's not shit. So that's a good thing. Your marketing team will thank you because they actually have something cool to go talk about. The overall business outlook, this is a piece where, again, this will depend entirely on your organization, on your company, but the fact that you have brought different people from different parts of the organization together and you've locked them in a room and you've made them be friends with each other and you've made them trade phone numbers and you made them all talk about their hopes and dreams and priorities can only work out well for your company. It helps break down silos. And anytime you're doing that for any purpose, you will have second and third order effects that will benefit you from that. So, think about it as we're bringing everybody together. Okay, you're not bringing everybody together. Everyone's not going to suddenly love each other and want to play more. But the fact that you have forced people to at least acknowledge and learn something about other parts of your organization will make everything else function a little more smoothly. And again, part of the marketing thing, if you start doing this now before you're required to do it, then down the road, everyone who's like, oh shit, they're requiring us to do this, and they're scrambling, you got this. You have a leg ahead. And depending on the advantage you're able to take of that situation, puts you at a competitive advantage. And that can actually make a big difference for your company. And that's not something that you guys think about every day, but there are a lot of people who paid a lot of money sitting on the other side of the building who do. So if you can take something to them that helps them do their job more easily, promise you everyone's going to be happier in the long run. So that is a very quick run through, and I'm looking at time. I think I kind of nailed what I was aiming for there. So that is, like I said, it's all guessing right now. Nobody knows exactly what anyone's going to be required to do, but we have some really good leads, and we have some really good directional, ideas of what may happen. So if anyone has questions about any of that, there was a lot of stuff all thrown in there and touched on very, very lightly. So, yeah.
My question is,
Damn, it's hot in here.
it feels like government being redundant and creating regulations that aren't necessarily needed. So many of the corporations in Connecticut are subject to HIPAA, PCI, those types of things that are already mandated. The only new scope, it seems like, is government itself. And just in terms of the demographics you've outlined. So how do we, if we the people come to that collective, how do we get this shut down or at least influence it such that it's not just redundant but valuable?
How do we make it go to somebody else and not touch us?
No.
That's what I think I heard you say.
Make it have value.
Right,
not just
right.
Be redundant.
How do we make it go be valuable for somebody else?
Yeah, so take all of who's not doing PCI, HIPAA,
Yeah.
Fox?
No, I think,
Yeah, this is
I think
very
all,
redundant except for the government. not
and there's
doing it.
definitely, because we don't know what they're going to be asking us to do, I'm totally with you. I think, it's a coin toss right now as to whether or not we're going to get heavy-handed, redundant regulation. Oh my God, this is the worst. How do I kill it? Or we might get something that says, great, here are the things you need to be doing. Just show us you're already doing them. We're not going to make you do them again. But we want to make sure, just from what I have seen in the strategy and knowing that there are all these other frameworks, regulations, requirements, things out there that overlap on a lot of the industry that's here in Connecticut. A lot of the requirements that you already have to meet for different things. I think the objective of this is not, and again, benefit of the doubt to them based on what we've seen so far, is not to suddenly create these regulations that sweep across and that everyone now has to meet something new. The idea is that there are spots that are within the different industries that are doing really well, that do have really great comprehensive programs, but it's not everybody, and it's not across the board. So let's find a way to raise the baseline level of security. That sounds, I'm rolling my eyes at myself as I even say that because it sounds so cheesy. But let's find a way to take all those places where there are gaps and there are holes and there's people who aren't taking this seriously, and let's raise them to that level so that everyone is, to an extent.
And then, so my second part is that the only new demographic that might not be doing this is the municipalities.
I think the municipalities are probably a little behind the curve, but I would say they are not the only group I saw on that list who sometimes sucks at this.
I understand. So if I look, I'm going to make fun of my own town. I live in Bloomfield. Our mayor is an art teacher, okay? So when we have people like that.
You probably have an amazing system of culture.
How come we haven't defined a competency framework?
That might be part of what comes out of this. I think right now, my understanding is that conversations are underway with different sectors and across different players within those groups to figure out what makes sense. And it's not going to be some like voice in the sky, man behind the curtain, woman behind the curtain, whatever, who says, do these things.
Minimum competencies of leaders at this.
It sounds to me like that is the plan. I think that, again, it could go so many different ways, and your version of what that should look like might be different from your version of what that should look like, and I may think you're both crazy. So there's a lot of room for subjectivity when it comes to this, but I think there are some very basic understandings of what needs to be done, and I think the municipalities absolutely are an area that have not always, just based on simple size and capacity, have not always taken this as a serious concern. So there's definitely places where they have more work to do than others. But, you know, I wouldn't let the rest of the list off the hook and say, oh, I'm sure they're fine, because they're probably not. You know, I think higher education is another similar area where there's a lot going on, but it wouldn't be everything.
And final question.
Please, go ahead. I like things in groups of three. It's your last chance.
You talked about kind of the response part.
Uh-huh.
So let's say something really happens. What should we, as we the people, expect from Malloy to respond competently?
It depends on what happens. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings of, and I'm not saying this is implied in your question, but one of the biggest misunderstandings of someone who isn't in this space every day like we are is, what can I expect from Malloy when something happens? Because it's never going to look the same. It depends on what happens. You're going to expect very different things from your government if a financial institution is breached or, you know, the sub base goes down. I mean, there's a lot in between. If the power grid goes down, I want to hear a hell of a lot more from Malloy than I do if, you know, UBS loses some stuff. I think there's, what you can expect is being proactive, being involved. I think what I counsel clients on when they're putting together plans for response, and it's always on that, what do we say? What does our executive say? What do we say as an entity? And it's always, you have to say something. So if you're silent, that's a problem. You have to say something. You have to address what you know while acknowledging you may not know everything. And you have to do so in a way that makes me understand that more will be coming. Not that your story will be changing, but that information will be updated as we have learned more. And I think, to me, if there's more than that in the beginning of any kind of breach, whether it's Malloy or, you know, an executive somewhere else, having them be involved and to tell us in a transparent way the steps that are being taken to resolve that problem, in addition to the steps that are being taken to make sure something else doesn't happen like it, matter. Those are the things that to me would say good leadership. Good job. Got it. Okay, you're on it. Your team is doing it. I trust you to be taking care of this. So, hope that helps. Yeah?
So, what do you think about this trend of state-by-state regulation and legislation? So I work for a large regulated organization here in the state, and we have a presence in every state in the country, a lot internationally as well. And New York State, DFS is better written than most, regulations or data protection, like HIPAA and others. But it still introduces a lot of complexity. And then when you talk about California looking at options now for legislation, and here, if I look at the lawyers and the security folks who allocate to one state, and the growing complexity of managing this across 50 states,
Yeah.
does it make no sense to say, should we just have some other type of overall
Right. I think that is one of the biggest challenges right now that organizations face, is that in the grand scheme of things, this concept of, cybersecurity and regulating that cybersecurity, the idea that cybersecurity is something that can be regulated is fairly new in the grand scheme of things. So as industry groups, states, places like New York and others are starting to decide more needs to be done, they're not seeing it move at the federal level. Sometimes they don't care if it's moving at the federal level. They just want to take care of their stuff because that's the nature of state politics. Like, that's how it works. You want to take care of what you are responsible for, and businesses such as yours and others that are across states, throw in a whole new level of entities that operate on a global level, and oh dear Lord, I don't know how they do it. But I think that the place in the trajectory right now where we find ourselves is that there's still more coming. There's still more little odds and ends. The patchwork quilt isn't done yet. There's still patches being added to it with new states and new regulations coming, and everyone's trying to scramble and figure out what to do, assign, like you said, lawyers and experts over here and over here and over here, because everyone has to balance it out. I think at some point we will see that pendulum swing, and it will, whether there is an uprising among corporate America, I don't know what it will be, but I think eventually those state laws may not go away, but we may see some type of, not even a direct forcing function, but a really strong push towards a singular framework that people can use. And I don't, honestly, been in federal government a long time, I don't think we're ever going to get a singular framework that everybody everywhere says, yes, we don't need HIPAA, we don't need DFS regulations, we've got this. It's never going to happen. But you may find states agreeing to adopt similar frameworks that aren't creating such competing priorities and challenging compliance issues for companies. So I don't think we've gotten over that hump yet. I think there's more still coming as it builds up. But ideally, at some point, states and all will realize that balancing it out helps. So good luck. Sorry, go next to you and then we'll jump over. Yeah.
Do you think it could be offloaded to things like cyber insurance policies where people are incentivized to lower the premiums to control things?
I think the insurance piece is going to be a big driver of a lot of it, because I call cyber insurance the giant Wild West right now, because anything goes. Like, talk about having to read the details. I mean, seriously, you have to read the details because there could be anything in there. And you could be paying for anything or nothing and not even know. But I think that as the insurance policies are evolving and becoming more mature, and companies are becoming more inclined to buy them and to have cyber insurance, and are starting to demand coverage for things they didn't demand before, I think there will be, in a sense, sort of a leveling out and a standardizing there of what's acceptable for what becomes an acceptable base level of insurance coverage and requirements to get that insurance coverage. That could be a framework that impacts or influences and applies to other states and all too. I mean, it's just another thing that companies have to comply with in order to get their insurance, but it could be something where that becomes the thing that influences all the other new things. Does that help? Yeah.
Do you know what caused this strategy to be created in the first place? Was there legislation that was passed, or somebody think it was a good idea? Because from what I can tell anecdotally, customers don't really care.
I actually honestly don't know the answer to that. I don't know if this came from legislation or if this came from, an order from the governor's office as a priority. Woke up on a Tuesday, thought it was a good day, it initiated on Thursday. I don't know. I've seen stranger things happen stranger ways. But I think that, to your point about people just kind of not really caring right now, I think that's fine. There's nothing to care about. It's strategy. Federal government produces a strategy every Wednesday. Like, whatever, it's a strategy. That's not true, but they're pretty common. So I think that that's why the implementation plans and the action plans matter so much, because you only make people care by forcing them to care. it's a company, it's a business, it's an entity. They don't care because they like to care about things. They care because there's money somewhere involved. And whether that's a regulated requirement, whether that's, a fine they're going to get hit with or something, that's the time that they're going to care. And my point about getting ahead of that curve is that there are a lot of things that you care about that this can help you drive that you can do now before it's a requirement, so that when it becomes a forcing function, it's not that big of a deal because you've already done it, or you've done a good chunk of it anyway. Yep.
Going back to some of your earlier bullet points, there was a thing in there on information sharing. And
Yes.
I'm curious whether
It's all over. I'm not going to flip back. Yeah.
whether you see that as being just a reporting and compliance regulatory burden, like more auditing, or whether you see it as some sort of, is the state actually going to facilitate that in any way and give us information sharing that is useful to the people participating in that information sharing? Is it just going to be one way you're sharing information with the state? What's your take?
My expectation, and again, not based on any knowledge that's legit, is that it will be a way to facilitate information sharing both within industries and between the government and the private sector, because there's so much intel, there's so much knowledge, and it's not just about threats. That's the most obvious thing that people talk about with information sharing. But it's also best practices. It's also things that work, things that don't work, things you've tried, etc. But there were a lot of different places throughout the strategy where they reference facilitating the sharing of information.
That could be valuable.
I think there
Sort of publicly available something.
are a lot of pockets of knowledge and a lot of pockets of information and intel that exist both within, from something as obvious as the FBI to state government to, large financial institutions that do this themselves. And I think that one of the main things we'll see come out of it that's not really a regulatory type of thing is the creation of entities to facilitate the exchange of information, because the more you know, I think that's going to be a big piece that comes out of this. So whether it's between law enforcement and industry, whether it's between government and private, there's not really a good way, as the federal government's been learning, to mandate sharing, but finding ways to facilitate sharing can go a long way. So my expectation is that we'll see something that takes that kind of a shape that isn't just the forcing function of a regulation. So there could be something good. You never know. You got it all figured out, and there should still be something valuable here. Yes, last one.
The two big regs that I'm spending a lot of time with is New York DFS and then there's GDPR from Europe.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
both of those are not only self-funded as far as what they expect to levy in fines and penalties, they also want to contribute back to the government entities billions of dollars worth of fines. So that's a large driver. And I can't imagine that in Hartford they don't see that as a big reason to put this in place.
I think it would not be far-fetched to expect that somewhere at the end of the day, the government will make some money off of this. I think that's probably not crazy.
And I don't mean to be cynical, I'm just saying.
No, you're preaching to the government choir. I am cynical. I was cynical in it. It's hard to be cynical and all shiny and idealistic at the same time, but you can do it. I think it's absolutely seeing something along the way that involves a fine. I don't think it would be crazy. And, so that fine happens to go back to Hartford? Oh, that was surprising. I think that's not going to be super far-fetched. But whether it's something as crazy and intense as GDPR or something that still is kind of TBD, like DFS is, to an extent, we've just hit the first deadline, still kind of waiting to see what that shapes up to be for the long haul. Or whether it falls somewhere in between, I don't know.
They've only hired 30 new auditors so far.
Yes.
They want to hire 200 by the end of the year.
Yeah. That might be a fun little secondary reason that implementation timeline is 2 years. Yeah. So I think we're all done. Thanks for the 98% of you stayed awake.